Hi everyone, I am Jess Hendrickx. I have taken over Hendrickx Associates from Sarah. Just before lockdown, just in lockdown, I think. All of that time is a bit of a blur, I think, to all of us. I am following in my mother's footsteps and here today to talk about autism and employment. So, bit of a session overview. I'm going to talk about autism and employment and some actually really horrible statistics around autistic people in employment or not is what actually the case. Transitioning from education and into employment and some kind of barriers that there may be and why that is the case. And some kind of differences that autistic people can face within the workplace, so communication, social and sensory. Also talk about masking, because I think that this is a really big topic that we are all becoming much more aware of within the autistic population. Also when to disclose, if you should disclose that you're autistic to a new or current employer. Some interview kind of prep and how you can help people before they go into an interview. And some reasonable adjustments as well. And then focusing on strengths, because I think that is really important, that we do talk so much about the differences and the difficulties that autistic people face within the world itself, which is not the autistic person's fault at all, but we don't talk anywhere near enough about the strengths that people have as well. So a little bit about me. I am dyslexic, autistic and ADHD. So if you do see any typos, please don't tell me, because I'm sure there's probably one or two in there. And now I've said that, there is going to be somebody in the room that spots one. My day job is that I'm a trainer and a diagnostician as well. I work for a company called Axia, ASD, who are based up in Chester, diagnosing people, adults, predominantly without learning difficulties, because most of my work's done online, but do have a history of diagnosing kids as well. They're the best ones, is the really little ones that laugh at you when you say things like fart. I love diagnosing those ones. And also because I know that it will be, it makes a difference to their life as well. So in my private business, Hendrickx Associates, I also carry out non-clinical diagnoses. The reason that they are non-clinical is I am not clinically trained. I can do this with Axia because it is signed off by a clinical psychologist, and they luckily understand that it is more about your experience rather than the bit of paper or the training that you've done. I've also done the autism and Asperger's syndrome. I know that this isn't a used term anymore, particularly, but that was the qualification that I did with Luke Bearden, who was pointed out earlier on, and I will be using his golden equation as well at the end of this presentation. So my focus when I did my PG cert was on autism and eating disorders, because at the time there wasn't very much being spoken about that, and I got a bit of a special interest in it and read everything that I possibly could. I'm also a published author, both of which books have been with Sarah Hendrickx. I wrote a chapter in her new second edition, Women and Girls on the Autism Spectrum, on autism and eating. And also, literally a couple of weeks ago, 21st of October, our new book came out, Could I Really Be Autistic? Which we are hoping is going to be a kind of handbook for people that are looking to find out whether or not they're autistic. It really promotes self-identity, not just clinical diagnosis as well. So very quickly, my work history is a bit bizarre. It's a bit all over the place. I started work at the age of about 15. I worked in a call centre. I've worked many temporary jobs. I was particularly good at interviews because I learned very quickly the rules of them. And during this time, I didn't know that I was autistic, so I wasn't disclosing to people. I did occasionally disclose I was dyslexic, but even then, we are talking 20 odd years ago. Even then, it was like, oh, you're dyslexic. Is there something wrong with you? So I do understand that from a kind of neurodiversity point of view, that it is difficult to disclose to workplaces, and a lot of people have got quite a lot of anxiety around that. So, autism and employment. The current figures are that there's only 3 in 10 autistic people in full-time in full-time employment. This is according to the Buckland Review that came out last year, which was a review and a report that was done on autism and employment. Just some key stats. I did pinch these off of the NAS website, and I am crediting them for this. So there's just 3 in 10 autistic people are in work, compared to 5 in 10 for all disabled people and 8 in 10 for non-disabled people. So those figures are really, really low. Autistic people also face the largest pay gap of all disability groups. Autistic graduates are twice as likely to be unemployed after 15 months as non-disabled graduates, and only 36% find work in that period as well. Autistic graduates are more likely to be overqualified for the job that they do have, and they are most likely to be on 0 contracts and least likely to be in permanent roles. So there are actually some really scary statistics, and I think that the reason why this is so low is because there's a massive lack of understanding by employers of actually how positive it can be to have autistic people within the workplace, that there is still such a massive stigmatism about autism, unfortunately. That autistic people are unsociable, they're unflexible, all of these kind of stereotypes that go with autism are why I think that people are maybe not employing autistic people. There's also most work environments are not set up for autistic people either in a sensory point of view. So you're going into work, there's lots of horrible strip lighting, there's lots of noises, there's lots of smells, and all of those things become incredibly overwhelming. And after a long period of time, it can be really difficult to be able to sustain that on a daily basis. You also throw in things like commuting times as well. If you don't have, employment on your doorstep, that you have to get a train, a bus, drive, and all of those things, again, can have a massive impact. And if the employer is not supporting somebody to be able to access the workplace, then the autistic individual is much less likely to be able to succeed within employment. And also non-inclusive recruitment processes as well, that, a lot of them are interviews, rather than, I'm a massive advocate for actually getting people in to do the job, even if it's just for a couple of hours or a day or something like that. I do think it should be paid. I don't think it should be unpaid labour. However, being able to prove, rather than answering questions like, when have you shown good customer service? I don't know. That's a really difficult question to answer for an autistic person. Or, where do you see yourself in 5 years? On a beach, hopefully. But, you can't tell that to an employer. They'll be like, no, they don't want to be at this company. They're not, determined and invested in us. So I think that is also another reason why there's lots of barriers, obviously, but these are just some of the kind of key ones. All right, so transitioning from education and into employment. So the potential issues around this is that school is really structured. Yes, we know it is not always the best place for autistic individuals, and especially, is it David? Yes, we're sort of talking about earlier on. I only saw a little bit of his presentation, but yes, school is not set up for autistic people. We all know this. However, it is much more structured than the workplace. There are very distinct rules and boundaries when you go for lunch, who you should be speaking to, who you shouldn't be speaking to, and all of those sorts of things. So that transition, especially if you've not got any information around it, that can be really daunting for a lot of people. And especially autistic younger people. Also, workplaces are incredibly different. There is a lot of unspoken rules within the workplace. My favourite one, hint the sarcasm, pick up the sarcasm please, is bringing in cake on your birthday. You should be buying me cake, not the other way round. We need to scrap that rule, please. But there are, every workplace is different, but every workplace does have these kind of unspoken rules around, even just things like complaint procedures as well, around, who you should be talking to if you are unhappy, and a lot of them are really not very clear. Also, transportation and commute times as well, that if you have been getting mum or dad to drive you to school every day, or it's just around the corner so that you can walk there, If you're then having to put on top of your normal, your working day, then a potential sensory nightmare of being on a train or a bus that is really unpredictable because we live in the UK. We have no idea when it's going to turn up or if it's going to turn up. That again can add a lot of barriers for people, trying to access the workplace. So when people are looking for for a first job, help them come up with that list of what are the definites, what do they want to get out of this? Are there companies that they're really passionate about that they want to work for? What are the no's? What are the absolute hard no's? I cannot do this under any circumstances. For me, it's retail or hospitality. I would be a mess. It's not that I have anything against people that work in Tesco's. I think that hats off to them. They need to be paid more money. I could not do it because of it is definitely the sensory and the social side of things as well, that I wouldn't be able to speak at the end of the day. I would be completely shut down. So think about, come up with those kind of yes, no's, and the maybes, the things that people can maybe compromise on. So if it's the dream job, can you commute just a little bit further for it? Would that be okay? But be really realistic with people. Think about the types of roles, like I've said, retail and hospitality. I know a lot of autistic people that think that that would be their worst nightmare because of all of that, just so busy. You're on your feet all the time. You're always chatting to people and things. Focusing on passion and interests is a really, really important one. I love my job because I get to talk about one of my special interests. And if you can harness that for somebody and think about, and they're the most successful, and by successful, I mean happy, safe, both mentally and physically, and fulfilled. They are the people that are most fulfilled in their roles, are the people that are working within industries or jobs that they are particularly passionate about. So, communication differences in the workplace. So as we know, a lot of autistic people can struggle with both expressing and interpreting neuronormative non-verbal communication. This is things like facial expressions, body language, tone and voice, and emphasis. One of the other problems is this expressing it as well. So people that you are working with may think that you're really standoffish, that you look really miserable because you've got a really neutral facial effect. I've seen many candid photos of myself where I look like I'm just about to murder somebody and I'm having a really jolly time. My wedding photos are awful for that reason because I don't know what my face is doing. So when, Zoom came along and we all went online and I was confronted with this little box with me in it, I was like, oh, gosh, that is weird. I'm not, my face is not doing what I think it's doing. So if you've got a neurotypical person who is seeing that, they're making assumptions as well. So it's not just about the autistic person maybe not being able to pick up on what somebody's feeling or what they're thinking, but it is also the other way around. So it is this double empathy problem, I think, is really apparent within kind of non-verbal communication especially. Eye contact for autistic people can be painful. It can actually hurt. It's not just I don't want to, I'm not looking. It can be physically uncomfortable. And also, the amount of people that I've assessed that said, if I'm actually making eye contact with somebody, I'm not listening, because all that's going around in my head is that narrative of, am I staring now? Is this too intense? This is getting really intense. I should look away, but how long do I look away for? And how can you have that in your head and listen and be able to process what somebody else is taking in? So if you are neurotypical in this room and you are interviewing people that are autistic, bear that in mind, that actually it is easier and better for somebody who is autistic to not make eye contact. It does not mean that they're not listening. Also personal space as well. Some people that are autistic will stand really far away from you. Some people will stand the right amount and some people stand really, really close as well. And again, this can make people look weird, in inverted commas, because the other person doesn't know why this is going on, what's going on for them. Recognising people's faces, right, here we go. Prosopagnosia, yes, I did it in one. Face blindness. This is really common within the autistic population, and it means that you struggle to recognise people's faces within, it could be somebody that you see on a daily basis, especially if it is in the wrong context. So for example, if I bumped into one of you guys in my local Tesco's, which is a 2.5-hour drive away, so it would be a bit weird, but I probably wouldn't recognise you, even if we'd had a full-blown conversation, because you are not in the right context. So why is this a problem within the workplace? If you bump into a colleague and they're like, "Hi, how are you?" You don't recognise them, they're going to automatically think that you are being rude, when that is not the case at all. So this can be one of the problems that autistic people, and this is something that a previous client of mine, when I was doing a lot of mentoring, faced on a daily basis with people that she'd worked with for sort of nearly 10 years. So the verbal communication, adjusting your style, your communication style to the context of the situation. I once told, I was working in a call centre and my boss came up to me and she said, "Jess, one day you would make great team leader material." And my response was, "I've got bigger dreams and aspirations than being a team leader in a call centre." It was true. My contract wasn't renewed a week later and I had no idea why. Absolutely no idea. I also didn't know I was autistic and ADHD at that point. But it was that just like, you know, this is just the information that's in my head right now. And again, it was in the pub with one of my colleagues and they went, "You do know why you don't have a job anymore, don't you, Jess?" And I went, No, what did I do wrong? And they told me and I went, oh yeah, no, that makes lots of sense now. That makes lots of sense. So I didn't adjust my communication style to speaking to my boss. I have also told bosses to F off before when they have been inappropriate and other people have gone, "Oh no, she's going to get into trouble for that." They couldn't because of how inappropriate they were being, but there has been many a times in workplaces, it's a miracle that I've never actually been properly sacked, because I do run my mouth, especially around authority, which we will get into in a minute. So again, you can see why this may be a problem within, you know, in employment. If that other person doesn't understand that I wasn't trying to be big-headed or arrogant, I know that that's how it came across, but that wasn't my intention at all for that situation. It was just, I don't want to be a team leader, but the words that I used were not appropriate for that kind of situation. Also turn-taking, so social reciprocity, sharing interests. A lot of autistic people, as we well know, are much more likely to want to talk about their interests rather than small talk, because small talk is boring, pointless, superficial, and a complete waste of time. We want to talk about the interesting, nitty-gritty stuff. That is the bit that gets our blood going. But that can mean that we dominate conversations at times, especially if we are, you know, somebody asks us a question about our special interest, we are much more likely to stand there and just monologue at them about it. My poor husband is fed up with me talking about pottery at the moment. But, you know, he married me, so he knew what he was getting into. Bluntness, again, not adjusting that communication style to the context that you're in. The bluntness, there's no malicious intent there for the most part. It is just inadvertent, but obviously can get people's backs up, unfortunately. And picking up on jokes and sarcasm, you know, as a bunch, we do tend to be quite literal. We've got an amazing sense of humour, but when we understand it and when it's made really clear to us, we particularly do not like being the butt of jokes. We are going to take that quite personally. And I think that that comes from a lifetime of knowing that you're different and that you're the odd one out and that you're not quite kind of fitting in with people. So it feels really personal if somebody makes a bit of a joke about something that you've done. Okay, so social differences then. A lot of autistic people in the workplace feel really excluded because they cannot join in socially in the same way that their non-autistic colleagues can. They may want to, they may really have the want to be able to do that, but find it very difficult because they're around people all day, and therefore having to go and socialise in the evenings or at the weekends can just be incredibly draining, and they know that they need that time to be able to recharge their social batteries to be able to go and do it all over again, either the next day or the next week. There may be a bit of a limited interest in peer relationships. I've assessed a lot of people who say that their work colleagues are for work. I am there to do my job, I am not there to make friends. That the only thing that they may have in common with this person is that they are doing the same job or working in the same team. They may not have any interests, shared interests beyond that. And for a lot of autistic people, those shared interests are really important within friendships, that it gives you a better sort of standing to begin with to be able to build on that sort of moving forwards. The people pleaser or conflict avoidant, as somebody said to me yesterday, is maybe a little bit of a better term for it, but it was too late for me to update my presentation. Typically, and I am going to gender this, autistic women are more likely to say yes to everything, and that is very much a case of masking, either because they don't want to stand out, and they just want people to like them and just want to just fly underneath the radar, so they are more likely to say just yes to everything without maybe thinking about the impact. There are obviously autistic men that do it as well, but in my experience, autistic women tend to do it a little bit more. That can lead in the workplace to being taken advantage of by people who see you as incredibly good-natured, and therefore will go, oh, go on, just do this little bit of extra work for me, will you? Or, oh, don't tell the boss that I've, skived off half an hour late, or I'm in half an hour early. And, they may just kind of go, yeah, okay, yeah, not a problem, yeah, I'll do that, because they don't want that kind of conflict with one of their colleagues that they're working closely with. Not understanding the office rules, like I said, the cake one, for example, but also not, understanding that maybe it's not okay to tell your boss to F off when he's been an idiot, that you are meant to just kind of go, ha, 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 okay, and leave it at that. And the authority thing. People are people. And, there is this kind of hierarchy within employment and within organisations that we are meant to kind of follow along with and, just kind of go, yes, you're the director, so I've got to be really polite to you and, be wonderful and go, yes, sir, absolutely, not a problem. But inside that may be really difficult to do, and may actually be really difficult to do outwardly as well. So being able to support people to understand that sometimes you just have to play the rules, which hurts and it's horrible, but sometimes that's just what we've got to do to be able to get by. Okay, so sensory differences. I'm not going to go through all of the sensory differences, but what I am going to do is just give some ideas on how this can be managed within an office environment, especially. Obviously, if you're working from home, then you've got so much more control over your sensory environment, but it's when you're working within an office that it's the problem. So I hate hot desking. I have a massive thing against hot desking, because for an autistic person, you want to know where you're going to be sitting. You're going to want to know that you've got all of your post-it notes and your pens and your pads of paper and everything like that lined up perfectly. That was a bit of a stereotype, but for some people that is really important to them. And when you're hot desking, you don't have any of that. You don't have that predictability or the familiarity of where you're sitting each day. The other thing that you can't control is the lighting either. And this isn't a work case sort of situation, but I do know somebody who has gone out and bought lights so that they can control their environment perfectly in a hotel. So it is a really the light thing can cause headaches, it can make people feel nauseous. So being able to have that control over your environment is really important. Sounds, there are so many things on the market these days. Loop earplugs, flare ones as well, the calmers that are made for neurodivergent people. So many different brands of noise cancelling headphones as well. So there's lots of ways that, as long as the employer is understanding that you're not just there listening to your music or a podcast, but you are using it to help with the environmental factor of the room, you know, get out there, be creative with people to see what they, you know, what would work for them. Smells is a bit of a difficult one, but you can try and get a desk as far away from the kitchen or the canteen area as possible. If food's a problem for you, make sure that, you know, or have things on you that are your comfort smells. So maybe a little bit of material that's got a nice perfume on it, if that's what you like. My favourite smell in the world's vanilla, and that's really calming for me. So things like that, I think, are really helpful for people within the workplace to be able to combat some of that kind of external stuff that's coming in. Bring your own lunch to work. If it's the same every day, who cares? You know, if that's your safe food of rice and chicken and veg or whatever, you know, just make sure that you've got things that that you can control and that are predictable for you in a world where it's unpredictable and there's so much change going on. Touch shouldn't be so much of a massive issue with other people. If people around you are hugging you at work, speak to HR, because that's not okay. And I'm giving you permission, if you are worried about it, go and speak to HR. But touch within your clothing though, remove the labels, wear your socks inside out, buy 5 pairs of the same trousers and 5 shirts that are the same, if that is going to make your working life just a little bit better. Temperature as well, if you can control the, you know, aircon or have a window open and things like that. And it is all just about making sure that this environment is right for you where possible. Everybody's sensory profile is different. Some people have a very heightened sensory profile, some people don't at all. So if you're working with people who are going into employment, do a sensory profile with them. Just write down the senses, figure out with them what it is that they need from an environment to make them feel safe and calm and not overwhelmed. Masking, what is it? That was a rhetorical question, by the way. It's adapting who you are. It's mimicking other people to try and fit into any given situation. Everybody masks to a certain degree. The difference between neurotypical masking and autistic masking or neurodivergent masking is that neurodivergent masking happens all the time, pretty much day in, day out. Whenever you walk out of your door into the world, you are adapting yourself to be able to fit in. Neurotypical masking, I think, is much more situational. It's going to a job interview, it's going and meeting the in-laws for the first time. It's that kind of just putting your best happy face on, your customer service voice, and going out the door. But it's only for that very short amount of time, and then outside of that, you feel that you can be yourself. A lot of autistic people don't even feel they can be themselves at home if they're around their parents or partners sometimes. So they don't get a break from being somebody that they're not. And the issue with that is it is utterly exhausting. And if you're not autistic, please understand how tiring it is. It can lead to burnout over years of, you know, pretending that you're somebody that you're not, because you are constantly having to put on a front and an act and a performance. It's also not a true representation of who you are. And I've met many autistic people that have said, I don't have a true sense of self. I don't know who I am underneath this mask because I've been doing it for such a long time, since childhood for some people, that, you know, a 5-6-year-old has learned that they are different from their peers, so they start to observe and they start to copy them, and that's when the masking starts. So how to help unmask? Get on people's levels, talk about their interests with them, get them to talk about, be open with them. Be open about your own struggles if you are autistic, you know, things that you have had to deal with in the world, or if you've got mental health conditions, within a safe and boundaried way, obviously, that isn't putting it all on the other person to then try and support you, but make sure that you are having open conversations with people. And if it's their interest, you know, if one of their interests is something that you've got no idea about, Google it. Ask somebody else or get them to tell you. That is when you are most likely to see the true person underneath the mask, is when they are passionately talking about something that they absolutely love. And also promote sharing those sort of thoughts and feelings as well. What I will say on that last one is that If somebody's got alexithymia, so this kind of what sort of translates into sort of not knowing your own emotions, don't ask somebody how they feel. Ask them what they're thinking instead, rather than going, how do you feel about this situation? Go, what do you think about this? What happened today? So get those more kind of concrete rather than abstract conversations going with them. You can disclose that you're autistic whenever you feel like it. It can be on the application form, right before an interview, in the interview, on your first day of work, or 10 years down the line. It is completely up to you. There is no bit of paper that I can find, and if anybody knows differently to this, please tell me, that says that you have to disclose that you're autistic before you start a job. I don't think it's a legal requirement. I think it's probably illegal to make somebody do that. But the things to consider about disclosing, especially if you're supporting somebody, and I don't like this bit of advice, but I think it is the best bit of advice that I can give. Can people get through an interview with their autisticness being obvious? Can they get through the workday without it, with it being, without them causing any problems? Do they need access to support, and do they need reasonable adjustments? If the answer to that is no, they don't need reasonable adjustments at the moment. No, they do not need access to support at the moment. Can they get through their workday without their autisticness causing them problems? Yes. And can they get through an interview? Yes. Don't disclose. And the reason for that is because of the amount of stigma that there is around autism at the moment. You cannot, if you put on an application form that I am autistic, and they don't give you an interview, how can you prove that that is the reason why? You can't. And I don't like that. I don't like that that is the advice that I give to people. I really genuinely don't. I think that we should be able to be loud and proud and open about our neurodivergence, 100%. Unfortunately, people still have biases around autism. And I think that for some people, and and you don't know who's reading that application form, you don't know what their experiences of autism is, unfortunately. If somebody cannot get through an interview without looking weird, i.e. that person doesn't know why they are not making eye contact, why they've got their arms crossed, then I think that people should disclose that they're autistic. Because I think that it would put them at a disadvantage within an interview process. So it is a really tricky one. It is a really, really tricky one, and I am very aware of that. And I wish that we could all be going, I'm autistic, and that not be perceived by some people as a negative thing. But unfortunately, that's not the world we live in at the moment, which is really depressing. So if you do disclose, you can ask for reasonable adjustments for an interview. And these are some of the reasonable adjustments that people have asked for in the past. So for questions in advance, details of who the interviewer is, so that you could do a little Google on them, see a picture of them, because that can lessen some kind of anxieties around that. And also ask if a supporter or an advocate can attend as well, to be able to help them along, during the interview. Do mock interviews with people. Practice eye contact to a certain extent. And I know that, again, I'm aware that we need to be able to advocate for people to be themselves, but think about looking in between the eyes, for example, to the cheek, not actually making eye contact, but faking it for that moment in time. Because people do judge, unfortunately, and I don't like that, like I've said. Think about body language as well. Think about, how you're coming off to people. And also understand that, autistic people, we can miss some subtle cues as well. So when to stop talking, when to start talking, and when the interview is over. So reasonable adjustments within the workplace. It really does depend on what your job is. So job role adjustments could be working from home, for example, Environmental adjustments could be things like hot desking or not hot desking, like I've said. Working conditions, communication approaches, using things like, there's so many assistive technologies out there these days that we can access that can be really useful for autistic people. Speech to text, for example, fantastic, it's what I use quite a lot in my job. Access to work funding, it's really difficult to get at the moment because there's such a massive waiting list for it. So if you are helping people access to work funding, try and get them on the waiting list as soon as possible. Colleague and manager training, so autism awareness training for people, and also mentoring and coaching is available as well. Also workplace assessments to think about what reasonable adjustments can be put in place for that particular job. And also mediation and advocacy if it gets to the point where somebody needs that, where they've really struggled within work because work hasn't supported them properly. So these are just some of the sort of reasonable adjustments that can be available to people. But it is, like I said, it is very, very much dependent on your job role and what you do for a living. So here are some of the many strengths that autistic people have. It can be really logical, which can be fantastic within workplace, very systematic, precision and detail focused as well. If we are in the right role, we can be incredibly knowledgeable and, have amazing expertise around our given subjects. We offer really unique perspectives, especially to problem solving, and we tend to be quite straightforward, no hidden agendas or politics, that we're just there to do our job and we just want to be able to get on with that in peace, basically. Unfortunately, the strengths are not talked about anywhere near as much as people's sort of perceived weaknesses or, their differences within the workplace. So if you are autistic or you are caring or working with an autistic person, please remember that autistic people are amazing and can do anything when we play to our strengths, because that, I think, is a really important thing to remember. But think carefully about the type of environment that you want to work in and the type of work that you want to do that will keep your brain firing all day, and you will be a success. And just very, very finally, Dr. Luke Bearden's golden equation, autism plus environment equals outcome, as we were talking about earlier on. The environment is so important that if we can get that right for somebody, then it's a really positive outcome for them. If the environment is wrong, then unfortunately it is going to be more negative. Also, equality versus equity. We should be striving for equity rather than equality. So not just giving everybody the same thing. And this is something that when I've delivered training about interview prep and things like that within organisations before, they have said, well, we can't just give the autistic person the interview questions in advance. And I said, why not? I said, because if you give it to everybody, you're not levelling the playing field, and that's what reasonable adjustments are about. It's not giving everybody the same thing, it's giving everybody what they need so that they can all reach the orange on the tree, like in this picture, so that they all have access to the workplace, they all have access to interviews in a way that is accessible for them. So I think that, these are just my final thoughts on this, and this is something that I put into all my training now, that it is absolutely equity over equality that we need to be striving for. So that's everything from me, and I will now open up the room to questions. Absolutely, and I think transparency from companies as well about what is actually the desirable kind of skills or experience and what is, expected, that actually sometimes they say it's kind of, desirable, but actually it is expected, isn't it? So I think full transparency from companies in job interviews, really, really clear, really clear of, how, especially these days with hybrid working as well, what is hybrid working? How many days do I have to be in an office, for example, or on site, versus how many hours do I get to work from home? The other thing is I am self-employed, and I'm a huge advocate for self-employment for neurodivergent people because, and yes, it is hard work, but if you can get to the point where you can be self-employed, you have full autonomy over your life. Like like you said, I work at 11 o'clock at night sometimes because I've had to sleep during the day because I'm so exhausted, but I get that opportunity to be able to catch up on admin and things. So I think that, and there is so much kind of wishy-washy language within job adverts as well, isn't there? Flexible working, what does that mean? What is flexible working? How flexible are you going to be? I do understand that, and some people don't, they want to keep, absolutely want to keep their personal life very separate from their job, but then think about strengths. So maybe, not focus on the topic, but think about, their strengths of what they can bring to a role, what they believe their strengths are, whether it's being very good with numbers, for example, or very good with people. I've assessed so many autistic women especially that are in people-facing roles, therapists, mental health nurses, mentors, diagnosticians and things like that. So it is, play to their strengths rather than the interest as such. I do think that if you're not going to follow your dream career as such, that you are really passionate about, which lots of people don't, then you should be able to follow all of your passions outside of your job or your career so that you can focus on the bit that brings you the joy in the world. I think it is a bit of a juggling act, especially if we're talking about young people going into employment to begin with as well, that they may not know what their how many spoons they've got or tickets they've got, whichever kind of theory you want to work with, for a working day. So, start with less hours. We all want to work part-time, don't we? Come on, that's just life. We don't, most of us don't want to be at work for the majority of our lives. We want to be engaging in those things that are, that are beneficial to us, but we all need to work, to pay the bills. Absolutely. I've got 6 GCSEs, no A-levels, no degree, and a postgraduate certificate. That, it's not about the qualifications, but if I went and, tried to do my job somewhere else, they wouldn't employ me because I don't have that degree level education. And unfortunately, if I could do a degree in a year, I'd get one, but my ADHD stops that. So, yeah. Any other comments or questions before we kind of wrap it up? No? Wonderful. Well, thank you very much for having me today, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks.